Hello, I am Aisha
and Paula, your cultural hybrid mental health therapist,
here to explore unfiltered and heartfelt conversations on core issues
that affect us as human beings. Get ready for honest, captivating,
and real stories that take you on a journey to navigate your life
in the best possible way.
So grab a seat
and stay with us on this episode of
Do We Have Your Attention?
Welcome back to the Do We Have Your Attention podcast. I'm Paula, and with me is
Aisha.
Today we're having a conversation about a topic that touches all of us, anxiety and fear. Specifically, what anxiety and fear have cost us.
And so with that, let's get into it. But you all already know the vibe right now. We start with our feelings check-in. So Paula, let's start with you. How do you feel at the moment?
That is a loaded question. If you asked me this maybe 30, 40 minutes ago, I would have been, I feel orange. I'm feeling a little bit orange, yellow, happy, positive, confident, excited. I still feel those things, but I'm going to be very honest with you. I'm feeling a little anxious too as well. So a little bit of gray today. I think it's one of those things where because this is something new that we are currently embarking on, so to speak.
Right.
Sometimes you're excited at the same time you're hoping, like, is everything going to go well? I hope everything goes well.
Right.
So I'm sort of a mix of yellow, orange, and gray. How about you? How are you feeling at the moment?
Thank you for sharing, and I appreciate you being very honest about how you feel. To be honest, I'm feeling gray today. Maybe a little bit of, let me think about this well. Yeah, I think I would say like gray and orange as well. I think I'm just very physically tired. It was a long week and, you know, I haven't had time to relax, which has been very frustrating for me. But also recording an episode on anxiety makes me anxious. so like this is very, I don't know, it's very anxiety provoking. But, you know, we'll get through it. We got this, right?
We do. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but when it comes to anxiety, this is like my wheelhouse. I've been an anxious child my whole life. So I feel as though I understand anxiety. I think that's bad. But you get what I'm trying to say.
No. I mean, it's good to understand it so you know how to cope with it, right? So it's kind of like a good thing to know. So, but you know what? Before we get into it, I think it might be helpful to break down what anxiety is and what fear is, because I think a lot of times people use those words in the wrong ways. So would you help us kind of describe or define what anxiety is?
Yeah, absolutely. And people do use them inaccurately. At the same time, I think anxiety and fear are quite similar too as well, in the sense where if you think about it, the diagnostics code, so DSM-5, when we're talking about what symptoms of anxiety look like. So if I have an evaluation with my client and they're sharing with me just like the onsets of their symptoms of anxiety, one of the subset symptoms there is excessive fear as a symptom of anxiety. So clearly they go side by side. However, anxiety in itself being something that it would be considered an actual mental health diagnosis.
Right.
It's just feelings of uneasiness, persistently worrying, excessive fear, ruminating thoughts, irritability. Anger also sometimes can look like an anxiety too as well, and it ranges from mild to severe symptoms. So meaning there's people who have experiences of anxiety where they might have very strong physical manifestations of anxiety. This might be TMI, but it's okay. So I mentioned that my feelings check-in, right? I feel a little bit gray. Typically when I feel anxious, and it doesn't happen all the time, sometimes it happens when I have, let's say, an examination or a test or something coming up.
Right.
I have anxious bowel movements.
You know what? Like, you know, they use that, they call it like butterfly in your belly.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, they're like, you got butterflies, but it's really what you're describing. No, for real, because I get that too.
I had no idea.
They're like, you feel like
basically, I had
butterflies.
been running to the bathroom. Like, I noticed I had been running to the bathroom. I'm like, I need to pee again. And this similar thing would happen to me when I was in university/college. Just before a test or an examination, I would wake up in the morning and I would be in the bathroom for like 2 hours.
Girl,
So my
what were you
point
doing in the
being-
bathroom? Just peeing?
Yeah, just peeing. Yeah.
Okay. Wait, it's not funny,
You
but
know
it's
what I
funny.
was doing in the bathroom, John. But my point being, anxiety, it ranges between mild and severe. So some people have actual physiological reactions to experiences of anxiety, whereas some other people don't. Whereas some people have panic attacks, they have anxiety attacks, whereas some other people don't. Some people might have headaches, lightheadedness, sweaty palms, things along those lines. For fear is a natural stress response, but can also become unhealthy or possibly problematic when it just interferes with our daily functioning, so to speak. Think about decision making, for example, making a decision from a place of anxiousness or from a place of fear. That can never, ever be a decision that would possibly be an accurate decision, or you're making a decision from a clear-headed space.
Right, like logical.
So, Aisha, if we were to sort of define fear from a clinical point of view, how would you define that for our listeners?
So I think, like you were saying, fear is an emotional response to a real or perceived threat. And I think it's important to make that distinction because usually for anxiety, because of how much we're ruminating on specific things, we're unable to tell what is a real or perceived threat. So usually with anxiety, although, some instances there is a threat in place, but sometimes it's hard for us, like you were saying, to have that logical mindset to identify what is real or what is not real. And usually with fear, we usually have the stress response of fight, flight, or freeze when we're experiencing stress. So like the way I usually...
That's true.
Or fun. The way I usually explain it to my clients.
Sorry to interject. Not F-U-N. Like, let's have fun is F-A-W-N. I just realized it sounds
fun.
Okay, back to you.
Fight, flight, freeze. Maybe fun. Response to stress. And I was saying, like, the way I would describe it to my clients is you're experiencing fear when, let's say you were walking and you randomly saw like a wild animal, like a bear or like a lion. Well, you're supposed to like react to that stressful situation. So in that stressful situation, we may freeze, meaning like we may just like deer in the headlights, just stand there and just be confused as to what to do. We may run, which would be flight, right? We're running away from the situation. Or we may fight, which is we may start, I don't know, people get adrenaline and start fighting with the wild animal if they feel like they're in a position where there's little to no escape. So it's like, I'm fighting to get out of here. And like you were saying, anxiety and fear, it's good to make the distinction because the difference is that we can have, it's very natural to have these responses to stressful situations.
Yeah.
But for anxiety, when it starts to affect the way you're functioning, the way you're making decisions, the way you're interacting with people, then that's when it becomes an actual problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that because they do share similarities in the sense where at the end of the day, the part of the brain that responds to stress and fear, the amygdala, it's typically, that's where people experience anxiety anyway. That's the part of the brain that is typically activated.
Right.
So there's that similarity there, but there's also the distinction there of anxiety, not all the time, but anxiety can be more so related to feeling uncertain about the future.
Right.
Not all the time though, whereas for fear, it's more an immediate sort of threat.
Right. So there's something that's threatening right in front of you and you need to react. And so that's when those stress responses, the fight, flight, or freeze, get activated. And so just to kind of dive into the conversation, I was wondering if you're okay with telling us a specific moment when anxiety or fear had an impact on your life. And I know, like you were saying, you're the queen of anxiety, which I don't even know. I don't want you to claim the queen. I don't want you to claim the queen, but you're saying you've had experience. Experience. Let me rephrase that. Being in an anxious situation or just anxious situations. And what does that look like?
Bad, because I have so many.
Well,
but at the same time, the whole point of this podcast too as well is to have very honest conversations that people can relate to. I believe I mentioned in our first episode about the car accident that I was in, I think 3 years back. I wasn't even driving. That's the craziest part.
Right.
I was in an Uber. It was an Uber driver that met, like, I hate to say, but it's true though, that was negligent, and we ended up running into a couple of cars on the highway, and I yanked my back, I yanked my shoulders.
Oh no.
Now obviously there's a physical impact of
that,
an accident like that, but then there's also the mental impact as well.
Yeah.
And if I'm being very honest, I already had experiences of anxiety and fear, to be honest with you, prior to the car accident. And you actually know this because let me just put this out there. Aisha saved my life once upon a time.
I did?
Aisha saved my life once upon a time.
When did I save your life?
This was 2018, I believe. I was driving to her house, and
I remember.
Unfortunately, you remember. I was driving to her house for a meeting. We're having a meeting. Like, come over to my house. And I at that time, I did not know that I had a dental infection that was spreading to my brain. So my body just sort of shut down as I was driving, and I went partially blind.
Guys,
like,
I was so scared that day.
I went partially blind. Till today, I have no idea how I got to your house. I just remember seeing like the gates, like the entrance gates. That was when I eventually, like, I just couldn't see. After that, I don't remember how I got to your house.
Girl.
I really don't remember much. I just remember being at the back of Aisha's car, and she was rushing me to the hospital.
Zoom. I was like,
I never even asked you how you felt about that,
girl, because you were basically on it, like you weren't able to like verbally express what was going on. So like I was like, what the hell is going on? At that point, I had to contact your sister. I remember I had to contact your sister, and I was like, how do I even explain that Paula just randomly drove into my estate and she's just not functioning?
She can't see, and her body's shutting down.
Girl, I was so scared. I was like, this is scary. So in that moment, I would feel like I was more fearful because there was a perceived threat. Like this was a life or death situation.
Yeah.
But I feel like if I got to the hospital and they didn't respond as fast as they did, surprisingly, I feel like they respond fast because you had contacts at the hospital.
Yes, and we sort of threatened their life. Sorry, my sister.
I don't know.
Not my sister didn't threaten. She respectfully threatened them that if they I'm just joking, but you get the point though.
I respectfully told them that if they don't attend to Paula, there'll be a problem.
I'm coming for you.
Exactly. So I felt like it was able to stay at fear because I knew that there was going to be a solution when we get there. But usually when we're in anxious, provoking states, it's that uncertainty that you were saying, right? The uncertainty of not knowing the outcome of what the situation will present that kind of puts us in that.
Absolutely. That's a great example, actually, because that example would be an example of fear. Because obviously I had fear. I had many moments when I was in hospital where I honestly thought I saw the light. I believe I saw the light. I actually genuinely had a conversation with God, and I was like, God, I guess this is it. Everybody that I know, even at that point, I even had like people that I hadn't spoken to in a minute that knew I was in hospital came to visit me. I was like, I'm gone.
I'm crying. Angel Gabriel, I see the
I saw the light. So that was fear. But then following that, and thankfully, obviously, I survived after some many moments in hospital where I did not think I was going to survive. And after that, I came back and I was driving. So I started driving again. And then I started having panic attacks, and I was driving. And having experiences of anxiety. I would be like, I'm going blind. I'm going blind. And I'm like, no, I'm not going blind. I can see. I'm just telling I'm sort of like my amygdala is reacting
to that
that uncertain feeling of not knowing if something like that was going to happen again.
Yeah.
So of course I would start having physical manifestations of the anxiety. So of course after the accident, it got worse. It got worse in the sense where it then led to me just having repeated experiences of anxiety nonstop. So that would be my own example, basically.
First of all, thank you for sharing. I know that we're like laughing and we're joking about it now because we've moved past that specific situation. And I, knowing you and just having conversations with you, I know you have like 2 kids in your therapy, 2 kids that you use to kind of manage your anxiety now, so we can low-key laugh about it. But, thank you for sharing. That wasn't funny, guys. When I tell you, even after the accident in like 3 years ago, the one that happened here, I was like, what the hell? I was so scared because I was like, it was the driver's fault and you having to be in that situation. I remember you having to go to the hospital and them telling you all these many, many medical things. And I was like, God,
like,
of course this girl is going to be anxious to get in a car and drive. And she already has so much negative experiences with driving. So I appreciate you like sharing.
Thankfully, I am driving. But I definitely still I have like 30 minutes now where I have just this anxiety. So I would say it's a panic attack. So there's a difference between panic attacks and anxiety. Panic attacks are more so very strong physiological reactions when people stick to anxiety. Physiological manifestations and reactions of anxiety, you feel like you're dying. Basically. Let's put it that way. Right. I think people don't realize, I know sometimes there's some level of, it's just having a panic attack, or just having a panic attack. Like people say that a lot. Right. But it's more so anxiety. Anxiety, yes, you're having experiences of anxiety. You're excessively worrying. Right. There's fear. There's ruminating thoughts. You might have some physical manifestations, but it goes in waves. So for anxiety attack is like up and down, up and down. It can come, it can leave. Whereas panic attacks can last half an hour. Yeah. It's not in your control. I have been rushed to the hospital for a panic attack from work. And I thought I was having a heart attack. So like I was in the ambulance and everything, and like my heart rate and all of that was elevated. And then of course eventually found out there was a panic attack. So it can be very, very different for sure. But I'm glad to say that I'm at a place where I don't have panic attacks. I have more anxiety attacks when I drive for half an hour, and then after that I breathe through it and I'm good. Right. Talking about those 2 kids I was saying, where you're able to kind of manage stressful situations like that. Absolutely. I do want to hear from you though, Aisha. I'm so curious to know. Girl, can you recall that, like your own experiences? With this topic, when they were saying what has anxiety cost you? Anxiety has cost me sleep. Hey, God. I just feel like I've come to terms with the fact that I have an anxious personality. Like I'm just going to be one of those people that are paranoid, are always excessively attentive to things, always overly thinking about things, sometimes avoiding big decisions, or when I'm in a situation where I have to make a specific decision, I'm just going to be scared, basically. I feel like I'm just one of those people. But the one I'm going to focus on and sharing today is when I don't even think I've told you this story before, but when I first moved to England, when I first started my undergrad, so I was in a psychology major, and being a psychology major meant that I had to take one of the courses outside the psychology department. Right. So psychology, the way we cite our papers is we use APA. Yeah. But me, what do I know? Young girl from Nigeria. I just came to school. I wasn't thinking that because the outside course was from the sociology department that they will use a different citing style. So I remember this. I wrote my first paper for the sociology department citing fully APA. Well, duh. What do I think happened? All of that came out as plagiarism. Like the paper was like 100% plagiarism. When I tell you that moment shaped my life in ways that I've never experienced before, it really did. Because first of all, they didn't send me an email about it. I didn't know. Apparently they send like the paper through your mail, like your mailbox. Oh, wow. So me in college, I checked my mailbox, but like not every time. I just like, whenever I remember to check, I'll check. Right. But apparently they had sent it to my mailbox and I hadn't checked my mailbox for a while. Like, hey, we found like you plagiarized on this paper. You need to come to a court hearing, blah, blah, blah. All the many, many things. So I didn't know. And then they sent me an
email saying, I think it was like 3 days to court hearing, reminder or something like that. I was like, court hearing for what? I was so confused. So I honestly went into like, imagine in that moment I had a panic attack because I couldn't breathe. I was like stuck at looking at the screen and I just couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was like, so many scenarios were playing in my head. And I just felt very stuck and very like, you know, when you're in a state of just, you can't move. You're just like there.
Shock?
That's what, like shock. Yeah. Like a state of shock. Yeah. I was very shocked. So I didn't know what to do. And then it was 3 days to the hearing. So I didn't know what to do. In the email, they had said like, reach out to student council.
Right.
They'll help you, blah, 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 blah. So the first thing I did was call my sister. I didn't even have the words to tell her anything. I was just crying. And my sister was like, what's wrong with this one? Like, obviously she was empathetic, but she was like, talk now. Like, what's the issue? So when I told her, she was like, yeah, just go to student council, whatever, and then figure it out. So I went to student council and they're like, first of all, like, how are you just finding out? Like, these are things that we could have helped you kind of investigate. So all those things that they were saying at the time it was constructive feedback because obviously I should be attentive to those things. But I didn't know. I really didn't know. I really felt like just a naive 17-year-old girl. I didn't know what she was doing in college. I just thought I would come to school to do my books and call it a day. Like, I don't think I ever imagined a time where they would accuse me of plagiarism.
That must have been scary.
Girl, when I tell you it was so scary, I didn't even know how to tell my father or my parents because I was like, hey,
I didn't even think about
they'll
that.
kick me out of school. They'll kick me out of school. I don't know. So the student council were like, you know, at this point, we'll help you kind of advocate for you and tell you like you just didn't know. But at the same time, you are required to read the booklet of every department. So every department has a booklet that will tell you like what the writing style is, what are the things you can do, what are the things you can't do. Look at me. I read for psychology. I didn't read for sociology. Again, because it didn't click to me like that. As I just don't know why it didn't click. So now I went to the hearing. When I tell you, I don't even remember. I don't recall anything from that hearing. All I remember them saying was that I should rewrite the paper and I'll get just the 40% mark. Like as I rewrite it, I can't get anything above 40% because it was my first offense. I said, okay, I don't even remember how the meeting went, but I remember though, like moving forward, even until recently, I now had a fear of emails, opening emails. I just couldn't read my emails because I felt like there was bad news waiting for me or I had done something wrong. And then the other thing that I started doing was checking my papers over and over and over again, feeling like I've plagiarized. And I just couldn't get out of it because to me, I had control of something when the other situation, I didn't have control. And I kind of wanted us to talk about how control plays with anxiety in when we're experiencing anxious situations. That lack of control can be very, very, very scary. Because the way the human brain will go out of its way to feel like it has control is
I have a very interesting relationship with control. It is, I would say interesting is even a good word to use to describe it, but I probably could have said something worse. I don't know what it is.
What is it?
I believe when we think about control, because we all as human beings, to be honest with you, we think we have a lot of control that we really don't. And I have this conversation a lot with my clients. I'm like, girl, sorry to bust your bubble, but there's nothing that you can do
control
or say that is going to change that outcome, especially of other people as well as situations. I look at control as just this like a false perception of something. It's very false in the sense where if I do this and do that or react this way and say that this would be the outcome, and typically it's not even about this would be the outcome. We're hoping that it would be the outcome. We can't even guarantee that it will be the outcome. But just that false sense of safety that being in control gives you sometimes, or thinking that you're in control gives you sometimes, it can become like an addictive behavior or personality trait where you just always want to have some type of influence on an outcome, and then when the outcome doesn't go as planned or as imagined or as perceived, then it leads to that just drop or
spiraling,
disappointment, spiraling, more anxiety, then it becomes this very vicious cycle that is really, really hard to control.
Right.
Or let's put this, it's hard to manage, so to speak.
Right.
I'm wondering,
It's like
for
putting
you,
yourself-
what does control look like?
I think I'm starting to work on my relationship with control.
Okay.
Because in the past, I would say that I'm very controlling in terms of how I like things to look. Somebody actually gave me feedback and said, I took offense, but after I reflected, I was like, they're kind of right. They were like, and I'm just being honest.
Shout out to
they
that
were
person.
Well, shout out to you.
Never mind.
But they were like, when things don't go your way, you try and find other ways to try and make it go your way. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, in the moment, I was like, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like, what are you talking about? You're just trying to say something to hurt me in the moment. But when I reflected on it, I was like, I am actually like that. Like, if something doesn't go my way, or if I ask somebody a question, or if I ask for a certain feedback, if the feedback is not the way I've imagined it, I will now continue asking until it now fits the answer that makes sense in my mind. And that is so horrible. That's not a great thing to do, because then it starts to affect your relationship with people. It's like you're also not communicating in a healthy way, because you're communicating to basically get the feedback that fits you, right?
Yep. That is so true.
So I started to reflect back, and I was like, this is not good though. Like, I need to work on it. So now I've started, I think as humans, it's very natural for us to want to be in control of certain things.
Absolutely.
But I've also learned, and also when I talk to my clients, I'm like, it's okay. Like, why can't we just sit with that not having the control? Just sit with that inability to control certain things. Like, that is okay. And maybe if you can't control something, if it doesn't reach that outcome, rather than comparing it to the outcome that you've imagined, what if there is something good coming out of this outcome and you're not taking it into consideration because you're too focused on the outcome that you imagined? So now that's where I'm trying to work on it and just be like, you know what? I tried my best, or I ask a question. When someone tells me that, I just leave it as that, like, okay, that's how they perceived it. Because trying to change their perception and trying to make their perception fit mine is not going to help me. Same thing with certain situations. If I've tried multiple times and if I've communicated with someone, or if I'm trying to if there was a goal I was trying to achieve, I'm just going to do my best and I'm trying now to be more comfortable with it. Not to say sometimes my brain will not be like, girl, how about you think about this and that? And I'm always telling myself, I welcome those thoughts, but I don't dwell on them like I would have in the past. So that's my relationship with control.
Very well said, honestly. I have this thing here behind me. Unfortunately, our listeners can't see it. My clients love pointing it out in my sessions when maybe we're having conversations about control and how anxiety really sometimes it's a manifestation of just our control issues, unfortunately. And it says, things I can't control, my thoughts, my behaviors, my reactions, asking for help.
Heavy on that.
How I express myself, my choice. Whereas things that you can't control, other people's decisions, other people's behaviors, reactions.
Heavy on that.
How other people feel, the past, the future, people's happiness. So there's a lot. And I love the graphics that I have behind in my office, because it also reminds me to as well. But it lets you know that a lot of, and I even want to make it, I want to be very, how do I put this? I want to be clear when I'm also saying this. A lot of it falls back to self, in the sense where the things that, yes, you can control. When it says control, not meaning you're policing your own self or policing your own behaviors, but more so understanding that whatever situation that you're having or interaction that you're having with people, focusing less on the situation and the people's reactions and more about how you're sort of showing up as well, and what are the things that you can change, as opposed to saying, no, I need to police my own behaviors. That's when I'm able to control a situation. No, that's not what we're saying.
Very well said. I think, we need to focus on ourselves, but like you said, not in a way of controlling, again, your reactions or how you interact with people. Kind of identify, like, in this situation, what can I control? What can I take accountability for? You're never in control of the other person's reaction or perception. And being open to like hearing other people out. Like if you're already going in the conversation with that control mindset, then you are going to drive the conversation with that control perception. So kind of finding a balance between that.
Absolutely. And I think from what you even shared, I'm glad that you brought up the conversation about how control and anxiety are very interrelated. And it makes me wonder if this is maybe something anxiety and fear has revealed to you about yourself that you weren't necessarily aware of until you had to sort of experience that. And you're like, okay, I'm on this journey of self-growth and self-discovery and understanding that if I want to be able to manage my anxious reactions or fearful reactions, then I'm going to most likely have to deal with my relationship with control. Like, what do you think?
I definitely agree with that. I don't think it was something that was in my conscious awareness in the past. I feel like I've just always engaged in the behavior. And shout out to the person that gave me the feedback. Like, I'm glad that they were brave enough to tell me. But in my mind...
change your mind.
No, you know what? It's okay, whatever. I'm glad they gave me the feedback because now I can work on myself. But I'm saying that to say that if they didn't give me they gave me the feedback, but I took it upon myself to reflect on it and try and work on it. So it made me kind of reflect on my relationships. And I also like tend to do it with people that I really care about. So it's not like with anybody. There's always people that I care about for some reason. And that's why I was saying earlier that I do have an anxious personality. Like it's very important to me. Well, I'm working on this too. In the past, it was very important to me how people perceive me. So I think that would kind of play a role into that control thing of like always wanting to not engage in behaviors that will hurt other people. But the reality is I am going to hurt people and people are going to hurt me, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And I can't control how I hurt people. I can control my actions so that I don't intentionally hurt people, but sometimes we do unintentionally hurt people even when we think we're not. And that is okay.
Yeah.
So that reflection kind of helped me identify that, I definitely have some control things here that I need to work on in terms of wanting a particular outcome. And I also noticed like, with my relationship with clients and just like relationships with other people, sometimes when you're feeling or working with a resistant client or like the progress is taking forever, I also started reflecting that I sometimes have to like take a moment to be like, this is not about me. You can't control the situation. You can be the best therapist you can, but don't bring that control thing in the session so that the outcome will feel you feeling like you're a good therapist. No, that's not how it's not going to work.
Very true. You're listening to you, it's also making me think about the cognitive mind traps.
I love them.
They have different names.
Yeah.
So cognitive mind traps.
Cognitive distortions.
Cognitive traps, cognitive distortions, which really is just ways in which our mind learns, like our mind sort of conditions itself to convince us of one thing when in reality it's completely untrue. That's like, I guess that's the simplest way to explain that. And I was thinking about what kind of mind trap, cognitive mind trap or thinking mind trap, something like control will fall under. For me, my cognitive mind trap that I struggle with the most is personalization.
Me too, girl.
I am in this moment, I've been praying to God for years to deliver me from personalization. And it's funny because a lot of my clients still struggle with that same distorted way of interpreting information where you just find for some reason like everything that people do or everything that people say or a situation, what comes from a situation, you take it, you interpret it as it's something direct or personal that you did that led to that reaction. And you know how sometimes people will be like, not everything is about you. Not everything is about you. And I agree, because if you're someone who struggles with thinking mind trap like personalization, you do have to remind yourself that not everything is about you, but it's deeper than that.
It is.
A lot of people who have personalization as a cognitive mind trap have had experiences of trauma.
Right.
Most of the time where unfortunately you blame yourself. like you blamed yourself for the trauma. So you find yourself generalizing situations or rather personalizing situations where it's just, if this person is upset with me,
it has to be my fault.
Aisha did not respond to my message for 2 hours, or she used one word. It is
I've done something wrong.
It's because I did not say something. It's because I did something. And then your brain just kind of keeps going and keeps going. But I don't want to dive too much on personalization because I just wanted to list out what the other ones, and I'll list some and list some other ones, and then you can maybe share what those ones are. Just a simple description of that. So overgeneralization, how would you describe overgeneralization, for example?
I would say basically like the word says, you just generalize everything. You take an event and turn it into a never-ending pattern of loss and defeat. So you're like, everything always goes wrong for me. Nothing ever works for me. I'm always on the wrong side of whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like you're always thinking that things will just go wrong, no matter how much you try. Usually before people even go into situations, they've already told themselves, this is not going to work out because I already know it always happens. This is not going to work out.
Yeah, so true. So true. What about black and white thinking? And then I think it's also called all or nothing thinking too as well. How would you describe that?
So I think all or nothing is like, it's either if something doesn't go this direction, nothing counts. So for example, I would say
it's either good or bad,
right,
it's either success or failure.
If I don't get an A, it means I'm a failure. If I don't get the Mercedes-Benz 2024 by February, that means I've never achieved anything in life. So you're thinking your brain is basically thinking in one direction and just invalidating the other ones or like the gray areas that could possibly happen.
Yeah. Would this be a good example of all or nothing thinking? I just thought about this.
What?
Oh, if you had a bad experience with, let's say, because social media now and this, at least they've calmed down a little bit, where there was this era where social media was just all about men are scum, scum.
I think that still exists.
Where if you had a bad experience in
a relationship,
then everyone who sort of represents that person that you had a bad experience with, then every experience, as far as you're concerned, that means those people, every experience is going to be bad.
Yeah, I think that would be a good example. Yep. So just putting men into one box, or saying, I think there's another way to put it, if people don't fit in a certain characteristic box that you're looking for in a man, then that means the other people don't count. So separating those two.
Well said. There's so many cognitive mind traps.
We have like jumping into conclusions, which kind of speaks into itself.
Yes.
So
filtering,
labeling.
Well, hopefully maybe we're able to share some of these mind traps on our social media account. I do want to just check in with you as we're rounding up this conversation. What are some helpful coping mechanisms that you've sort of adopted over the years? And with anxiety, there is the normal just lifestyle changes, ways to manage anxiety, but there's also the cognitive aspect as well of managing these ruminating thoughts, these cognitive mind traps. So can you share some very helpful coping mechanisms that you've learned over the years?
I think for me, something that I'm working on personally and I talk with my clients about is actually welcoming those thoughts rather than trying to actively deny them or try to distract yourself. Because the reality is they become so temporary. Like now you've distracted, you still come back, right? So welcoming those thoughts. And there is one technique that I love with CBT, and that's cognitive behavioral therapy, which is kind of looking for the evidence for and against a thought. So if you write down, I know, I love it so much because usually I'm like, there's no evidence, Aisha, cancelled. But basically how this works is you basically write down the situation. So let's say the situation was I texted Paula and it's been 2 hours and she didn't respond. And then I identify how I'm feeling. This is making me feel uneasy. This is making me feel anxious. This is making me feel like I've done something wrong. So identifying the thoughts too. What are you thinking in the moment? I've done something wrong. Oh, Paula hates me. Oh, Paula heard that I did something bad. Oh, I did something bad to Paula. Now she has found out something. I don't know. The thoughts could kind of vary. And I've learned that the more we dwell on it, the more the thoughts become so crazy. Like, how did I even think about that?
Yes.
But the intervention itself is kind of identifying with those thoughts that you've put down. Ask yourself, what's the evidence for these thoughts? And what's evidence against?
Yeah.
So usually when I say what's the evidence, I'm like, well, I don't have any evidence. And then when I come to evidence against, I start to realize like more rational thoughts. So I'm like, yeah, maybe Paula is busy. Paula is at work. She just hasn't had time to use her phone. She usually responds early. So now that she's not responding, it probably means that she's very busy. And I want to say this as well, not to say that you can't have evidence too. Like sometimes you can have evidence and it's like, let's say you had like communication issues with someone, now they just all of a sudden stopped, right? You can have evidence for like, oh, we're not currently on good terms. Yeah. But also in taking a moment to rate that. Like when I think about that though, does that mean that this person wouldn't now respond to me for the rest of the day? Like it could also mean that they're busy. It could mean that they're taking their time to respond because they don't know what they want to say or communicate. Yeah. And I just love this one and I always write it down whether on my phone or in paper. When you can see that difference or no evidence and evidence against, you're like, dang, I was definitely tripping.
The best. Thank you so much for sharing that.
What are some that you use?
I will say this as we're bringing this episode to a close, I'm definitely reflecting on just some of the things that you shared as well. The control one is definitely a big one for me. And I've really seen evidence questioning be very helpful. I am trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques. It's an interesting form of therapy/treatment modality that we use where it's a combination of practicing obviously mindfulness-based therapy, but then also using stress reduction techniques. And one of the things I like about that is it's a lot more of body work, like somatic work that you do with yourself, whether it's me just pausing in between to be able to really understand
what's going
my
on,
emotions, my feelings, whether it's me journaling, which is very, I highly recommend. I know some people don't necessarily like journaling. There's different ways to do it. Whether it's me body scanning, which is just more so being able to be still enough to understand where the physical manifestations of anxiety happen for me. And mindfulness-based stress reduction works a lot for me because I have a lot of physiological reactions to anxiety. So breath work, I love doing breath work, whether it's dynamic breathing, belly breathing, which are typically the most common types of breathing techniques that really help just regulate your central nervous system when you're having anxiety attacks. I would say as we're coming to, as we're wrapping up this conversation, those are some that are coming to mind for me.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. I love mindfulness. Like the way it works with my clients, it doesn't work for me that much because my brain is very distracted. But the deep breathing you said, that works for me. Like I have to take 5 minutes to breathe every day because it just helps me, like you said, regulate the central nervous system. Right. And I can identify where that stress is because a lot of time we're not able to tell. We don't realize that we do hold stress in the body. Yeah. We always feel like it's always mental and emotional. And
the body keeps the score.
The body keeps the score. Highly recommended book. I'm telling you, it will change your life.
Personally, that is not my favorite book to...
Really? Just for people to understand trauma.
That is not my favorite book to recommend for trauma. But I think it's a good book to start with for sure. I'm trying to remember one of the ones that I really, really like is by Paul Conti on trauma. And that's one. So I'm very biased because there's a lot of terminologies in The Body Keeps the Score. Right. It feels too clinical. Yeah. I don't know if you
well, that's why they tell clinical people to read it. But I've seen normal people say they wanted to understand their trauma and they read it and they got it.
Oh yes, a lot of people have read that book. Yeah. In addition to that, I found the book. It's called Trauma: The Invisible Epidemic: How Trauma Works and How We Can Heal from It. That also takes maybe both a clinical perspective and then a very more personalized perspective as well, which definitely helps.
Okay.
Yeah. But if any part of this conversation today resonates with our listeners, with those who are listening at the moment, absolutely, we would love to
hear from you.
Just connecting with us on your thoughts and experiences of anxiety, fear, control as well. What cognitive mind traps have you started to identify that you exude on a regular basis? Feedback from people who might possibly be helping you notice blind spots that you're not necessarily
not my shade.
aware of.
Not my shade.
But how can people reach us so we can be able to connect with them on a topic like anxiety that we can all relate on?
Okay, well, you can connect with us by email at info@DWHYApodcast.com, on Instagram at DWHYA Podcast, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, all the same. So just type DWHYA Podcast and we will pop up. We're the only ones with that name for now, so we are special.
Absolutely. Aisha,
Yes.
thank you so much. I enjoyed just learning about your experiences. That very scary experience that you had. I can't even imagine how I would have been able to handle that, but it's nice for us to be able to have this conversation in hindsight and just see how anxiety and fear impacted us, but then how we've also been able to just adopt some very healthy coping skills as well as time has gone.
Right, and continue to work on it. And on that note, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on our next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.